the helm. They deferred to a younger man distinguished as a diplomat and orator, Musquaconica. Musquaconica, or a.k.a. Red Pole. Red Pole! He was in a close relationship to Blue Jacket. Red Pole was in a close relationship to Blue Jacket. Probably a half-brother, a first cousin, and certainly a powerful ally. Red Pole shared some of his brother's vices and occasionally drank heavily. An American officer, Andrew Mars Chalk, who knew the two Shawnees in the summer of 1796, remembered how they retired to their temporary camp on an island at the foot of the Maumee Rapids for a drinking bout. Still, when sober, Red Pole was an amiable, urbane, dignified, and sensible man, intelligent and eloquent. It was probably for those qualities that he was chosen to superintend the Congress at the Glaze, but he also seems to have been a Mikochi. The Mikochis claimed the right to negotiate for the entire tribe, at least in peacetime, and the selection of Red Pole may also have been a way of satisfying protocol. Hitherto, Red Pole has cut an obscure figure in the surviving documents of the period, but in 1792 he stands firm and clear as the master of ceremonies at one of the most remarkable intertribal congresses in the history of the Old Northwest. 1792, those were the days. Back in the day, you know how it was when you and I were coming up. The gathering of an Indian Congress was a slow business. In the summer, Shawnee runners had gone out trying to hurry delegates forward, but many did not begin their journeys until the corn had ripened. Some arrived sick, others late. On September 15th, Captain Johnny went down to Georgia. No, he went down to the foot of the Maumee Rapids. To welcome 45 representatives of the Iroquois, living within American limits, mainly Senecas. But the Canadian Iroquois under Joseph Brant did not make an appearance until the Congress was over. By the end of September, however, a remarkable gathering had taken place at the Glaze. There were Shawnees and Miamis and Delawares and Munsees and Mingos and Conoys and Nanticokes, Cherokees from the heartland of the Confederacy, Wyandots, Ottawas, Ojibways, and Potawatomis from the Great Lakes were also at hand, as were the Weas of the Wabash. Sacs and the Foxes had traveled east from the upper Mississippi to reach the Congress, as had Delawares and the Shawnees from Missouri. Westward from New York had come Mohicans and the deputies of the Six Nations of the Iroquois, and from the banks of the St. Lawrence, members of the Seven Nations of Canada. The South, too, was represented by Cherokee and Creek delegates, and there as observers and suppliers were also the omnipresent members of the British Indian Department under Alexander McKee. All had been drawn together by Shawnee diplomacy and the luster of recent Indian victories. Finally, on September 30th, the Indians filed into one of the Shawnee villages at the Glaze, probably Captain Johnny's, and the proceedings began. The Shawnees and Miamis opened formalities, passing a calumet first to their elder brothers, the Iroquois and Wyandots, and then to the other leaders of the Confederacy. Red Pole, good old Red Pole, Musquaconica, held aloft the pipe Blue Jacket had carried west with black and white strings of wampum and welcomed the delegates. No other business was transacted that day, but Red Pole fired a warning shot, and he was not arrested. It was not felony menacing. He got in no trouble. He cautioned his solemn audience not to heed the bad birds who will corrupt your hearts, blind your eyes, and shut your ears against your true interest. His mind, if not his eyes, was on the Senecas, who he knew were here at the behest of the United States. What the hell were the Senecas doing there? Goddamn Senecas! They had made no contribution to Confederate affairs in recent years, but they had been talking to the Americans and got an increase in their treaty annuities, and the Shawnees were deeply distrustful of what advice they had to offer. Of course, A machine don't speak for men. Seneca, you're just a machine. You're just the machine at this point. You're getting paid. You're on the dole. You're the machine. What the hell does the machine understand about working class? October 2nd, anything. When Red Pole again stood before the assembled delegates, he launched a frontal attack on the Senecas. He reminded them of their former significance and their advice to the Indians to be strong and united and to defend our country. And he said that both the western and southern nations were waiting to learn whether the Iroquois would attend the United Council Fire. The Senecas were slow in coming, Red Pole complained, and had not concerned themselves with the Confederacy for 3 years. We have never seen you since that time, he informed them. We suppose you have been constantly trying to do us some good, and that was the reason of your not coming sooner to join us. We shall now send these speeches to all the distant nations to acquaint them with this council and of your being present. Before the Congress had opened, the Mohican Hendrick Palmut had fancied that he had cultivated a peace lobby among the Delawares, but now in public council, Buckcongehelas crushed any prospect of a wedge being driven between him and the Shawnees. Don't think that it was the Shawnees' sentiments alone, he said. All of us were animated by one mind, one head, and one heart, and were resolved to stick close by each other and defend ourselves to the last. 2 days later, the Senecas replied through their most spectacular speaker, Red Jacket. Oh, shit. Red Jacket versus Blue Jacket. He tried to reassure the Confederates. The Senecas did support the Union and gladly smoked from Blue Jacket's pipe. And yes, during the past few years, they had indeed been working to assist their Western brethren. Now, however, they had to inform the Indians that the Americans were willing to talk to them. The victories over Hamar and St. Clair should not blind the Confederacy to the need for peace. Don't be too proud-spirited and reject it, said Red Cloud. The Great Spirit should be angry with you. In itself, this advice was entirely sensible, but it sounded disingenuous given by people who had been treating confidentiality with the Americans in Philadelphia. Even the 7 nations of Canada, who for the most part were Iroquois peoples, reacted ambivalently to Red Jacket's discourse. They commended the peace initiative but wanted no independent dealings with the Americans, as the Senecas had undertaken. Chief Cochinnawaga urged all nations of our color in the island to be of one mind and strong. Chief Cochinnawaga, if the Americans wish to talk, let us put our hands together and join as one nation. If they did not agree to what we shall determine, let us all strike them at once. Red Pole was less charitable. On October 5th, he retorted to the Senecas fiercely, accusing them of duplicity. You did not speak to the real purposes you brought to this council fire. I could see what you are about from this place. You are still talking to the Americans. Your head is now turned toward them. When you left your villages to come here, you had a bundle of American speeches under your arm. I now desire you, brother, to lay that bundle down here and explain what you have been talking with them about these last 2 years. All the different nations here now desire you to speak from your heart and not from your mouth. So saying, the Shawnee orator picked up the strings of wampum upon which Red Jacket had spoken the previous day and threw them at the feet of the seated Senecas. The Iroquois were visibly flustered and begged to withdraw to confer. You have talked to us a little too roughly, complained Red Jacket. You have thrown us on our backs. Farmer's brother, another Seneca, farmer's brother, picked up the rejected wampum, threw it over his shoulders so that it trailed down his back, and led the entire delegation into an hour of urgent discussion. When they returned, Red Jacket made a clean breast of it. Yes, the Senecas had been to Philadelphia, but they had told President Washington that the Western Indians were angry about the land. The Americans had said they would satisfy the owners of the ceded lands if they had been purchased from the wrong Indians. He did not say he would give up the lands, Red Jacket conceded, but that he would satisfy the Indians for them, that he wanted the friendship of all his brothers, the Indians. Washington had promised to remove any military post established on unceded Indian territory and wanted a peace conference then. Then the Senecas handed over a tin case they had been given. It contained a map and several American speeches. Even this failed to restore Seneca credibility. The following day, the Iroquois delegation tried to avoid further public humiliation and did not attend the council fire. Instead, they asked for a private conference in their own camp. There, Red Pole, Black Snake, Buck Con, Gahilas, and a few others were served up a fuller and franker explanation of the Iroquois mission. The Senecas declared their faith in the justice of the United States, and while they agreed to support the majority will of the Congress, they strongly urged peace. These remarks found little favor. The Senecas were reminded that while they were talking peace with the United States, two armies of the Big Knives had invaded the Indian country. Brothers, they heard, had the Great Spirit been favorable to them instead of us, you would have found here their strong forts and only a small remnant, or perhaps none of your Western brethren, to deliver their sweet speeches to other nations, such as the Wyandots and Delawares of the Sandusky, had been temporarily duped, but the Americans did not succeed so well with these nations as with our elder brethren, the Senecas. For you now see them strong in defending their just rights to this country. They put their American speeches at their back and united themselves to us as one man. It was obvious that the Senecas had underestimated the intense sense of grievance felt by dispossessed Western Indians, such as the Shawnees, and their distrust of the United States. A war dance opened business on October 7th, and Red Pole dismissed the American overtures. All the Americans wanted was to divide us, he explained, that we might not act as one man. The Senecas had been naive, for the Shawnees knew full well what the Big Knives intended from the papers they had captured from St. Clair's army. If the Indians had been defeated, forts would have been built at Miamitown. The glaze in the mouth of the Maumee Indians who resisted would have been driven away, and those who acquiesced would have had hoes put in their hands to plant corn. For the Americans and been made to labor like beasts, their oxen and their pack horses. This was disparaging. This was a disparaging reference to the efforts of missionaries to improve Indian husbandry and to convert warriors into farmers. As for the willingness of the Americans to pay more for the lands they had taken, Red Pole thundered, "We do not want compensation, we want restitution of our country." If the Americans were serious about peace, they had only to destroy their forts and restore the Ohio boundary as defined by the 1768 Treaty of Fort Stanwix.